world as Leopold Barkowitz knew it had changed, though the rain still smelled of iron and the cobblestones still chilled his paws on winter mornings. The skies above his village, once blue and dotted with sparrows, now swirled with the ghostly contrails of planes that carried death. He had seen them once, from the safety of the torn armchair in the living room, as the children pressed their faces to the cracked window. Leopold, a dachshund with eyes too large for his narrow face, could only bark softly. A plea, perhaps, or a warning. No one turned to acknowledge him, and so he sank back into silence, observing. Leopold understood human words better than any of them could guess. It was a curse as much as it was a gift. Words like conscription and ration were daggers, each syllable carving away at the warmth that had once blanketed his family. Father was gone now, taken to fight on distant fronts. Mother worked tirelessly in a factory that choked her laughter with smoke and left her hands smelling of oil and soot. The children, barely more than pups themselves, wore hunger like a second skin. They still played sometimes, but their games had changed. No more make-believe kingdoms, no more knights and dragons. Now they mimicked soldiers, marching stiffly with wooden spoons for rifles. Beneath the armchair, Leopold's sanctuary, he pieced together their fragmented conversations. Words floated down to him, laden with fear and hope in equal measure. He longed to comfort them, to lick their faces and tell them it would be all right. But what could he do? He was just a dog. A good dog, yes, but powerless against the weight of a world unraveling. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the village lay cloaked in uneasy silence, Leopold's mind wandered back to the Great Dachshund War of 1937. It was a conflict humans would never know, fought in the shadowed corners of their own backyards. Leopold had been young then, full of fire and naive bravery. He and his brothers, Wolfgang and Dietrich, had infiltrated the feline empire's stronghold disguised as garden statues. They'd rescued the squirrel diplomat and carried him home, tails held high in triumph. But victory came at a cost. Wolfgang's wag, his joyful semaphore, was lost forever, and Dietrich, once a master of balance, had been robbed of his agility. Leopold's own body remained whole, but his spirit bore scars that no bark could express. The memories of those days rose unbidden now, stirred by the sight of human soldiers marching through the village square. They reminded him of the canine squadrons that had defended Bonehill, where chew toys buried as decoys had turned the tide of battle. Leopold's ingenuity had saved the day then, earning him the title of the clever hound of Bonehill. But what use was cleverness in a war of machines and men? The metallic clang of ration cans brought him back to the present. He loathed that sound. It reminded him of the mechanical foxes, soulless predators built by feline engineers to sow terror. One evening, as the children whispered their dreams into his floppy ears, Leopold felt the weight of their trust. The youngest, a girl with hair like spun gold, told him of her father's promise to return. She clutched his paw, her tears soaking into his fur. He barked once, a soft assurance, though his heart clenched with doubt. If only he could tell her that promises were fragile things, easily shattered by the cruelty of war. Leopold wasn't entirely alone in his burden. Maximus, a grizzled shepherd who had seen the horrors of the First World War, often shared the alleyways with him. Maximus spoke in gruff, world-weary tones, his voice tinged with wisdom and sorrow. "War changes everything, lad," he said one night as they lay beneath the skeletal remains of a wagon. "Even us dogs. But it's love that keeps us fighting, not the hatred they think drives us." Leopold nodded, though the gesture was lost on Maximus in the dark. In the chaos of the human war, Leopold bore witness to events that defied understanding. There was the Ghost Battalion, soldiers who wielded weapons of light and sound to deceive the enemy, their presence as fleeting as shadows. And then there was the Sorrow Engine, a device that drained the will to fight from all who came near. Leopold watched these horrors unfold from the periphery, his keen senses picking up nuances that humans overlooked. He saw how the soldiers' shoulders sagged, how their eyes lost their spark. He understood despair, even if he couldn't articulate it. But amid the despair, there were moments of connection. Clara, a young nurse, often found solace in Leopold's silent companionship. She would sit beside him, her hands trembling from exhaustion, and speak as though he could answer. "You're a good boy, Leopold," she'd say, scratching behind his ears. "Better than any of us deserve." Her words warmed him, though they also deepened his ache. If only she knew how much he understood. One day, Leopold discovered the children hiding beneath the staircase, their laughter a rare and precious sound. They had found an old ball and were tossing it back and forth. He joined them, his stubby legs chasing the ball with a fervor that made them giggle. For a brief moment, the war felt far away. But the sound of distant gunfire shattered the illusion, and the ball rolled to a stop against the wall. Leopold stood frozen, ears perked, his heart pounding like a war drum. In the quiet that followed, Leopold's thoughts turned inward. What did loyalty mean, he wondered, in a world so broken? Was it enough to be present, to offer his silent support when he could not change their circumstances? The memories of Wolfgang and Dietrich, their sacrifices, their unwavering courage, reminded him that even the smallest acts of bravery could ripple outward, touching lives in unseen ways. As winter descended, the family's struggles grew harsher. The buttery smell of bread, once a comfort, now mocked Leopold with its rarity. But he remained steadfast, a quiet sentinel in a storm of uncertainty. In the stillness of the night, he would lay his head on the youngest child's lap, drawing strength from her warmth. The war raged on, and Leopold's world continued to shrink. Yet his resolve grew. He was just a Dachshund, yes, but he was also a witness, a confidant, a symbol of enduring love. And perhaps, in the end, that was enough. Leopold Barkowitz, the clever hound of Bonehill, may never have been able to speak the words his heart longed to share. But his actions, his loyalty, his quiet courage spoke volumes, and in a world fractured by conflict, those who loved him heard him loud and clear. Leopold was no stranger to the biting cold, but the winter of 1944 gnawed at his bones like a relentless spectre. The snow piled high against the crumbled walls of Bonehill, muffling the distant thunder of artillery. Each night, the sky would glow an eerie orange, as though the heavens themselves were ablaze. Leopold kept close to the family, his small body pressed against the youngest child, Elise, offering what warmth he could muster. Her breathing was shallow these days, a whisper of life clinging desperately to hope. Maximus had been absent for weeks, and Leopold feared the worst. The grizzled shepherd had spoken of a final mission, a desperate attempt to sabotage a supply line that fed the enemy machine. "If I don't come back, lad," he'd said, his voice heavy with resolve, "you keep fighting. You keep loving. That's all that matters." The words haunted Leopold, a weight he could neither carry nor cast aside. In the quiet of the ruined house, Leopold's keen ears picked up the murmurs of the adults. They spoke of dwindling rations, of the looming shadow of occupation, and of Clara's secret trips to the resistance hideout. Leopold understood the stakes, even if he couldn't join their whispered counsels. His role was to protect, to comfort, and to observe. One night, as the family huddled together, a low rumble shook the ground. Leopold's ears perked, and he darted to the window. Through the frost-covered glass, he saw a column of soldiers marching down the main road, their boots crunching rhythmically against the snow. At the head of the column was a monstrous contraption, the Sorrow engine. Its black metal glistened in the moonlight, and its strange, ethereal hum set Leopold's teeth on edge. He had heard tales of its power from Maximus, how it could strip the will to fight from entire battalions, leaving them hollow shells of their former selves. Leopold's mind raced. He couldn't let the engine reach the city's heart. But what could a Dachshund do against such a thing? His paws itched with the memory of Bonehill, of Wolfgang and Dietrich, of the Great Dachshund War. He'd faced impossible odds before. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could again. Slipping out through a crack in the wall, Leopold followed the column, keeping to the shadows. The snow stung his paws, but he pressed on, his small frame blending seamlessly into the winter's embrace. The soldiers were weary, their faces gaunt and eyes vacant. Even the horses pulling the engine seemed subdued, their movements mechanical. Leopold felt the weight of the Sorrow engine pressing against his spirit, but he steeled himself. He had a mission. Hours later, the column paused to rest in a clearing near the edge of the forest. The soldiers lit no fires, their silence as oppressive as the cold. Leopold crept closer, his heart pounding. He needed a plan. Spying the horses tethered to a nearby tree, an idea began to form. If he could spook them, perhaps he could buy the resistance enough time to regroup and counter the threat. Leopold approached the horses cautiously, his breath visible in the frigid air. He barked softly at first, testing their reaction. One of the horses, a massive black-coated beast, snorted and stomped its hooves. Encouraged, Leopold barked louder, his high-pitched yaps cutting through the stillness. The horses began to stir, their unease spreading like wildfire. Suddenly, a sharp whistle rang out. A soldier had spotted him. "Just a dog," one of them muttered, but another raised his rifle. Leopold darted away, zigzagging through the snow as the shot rang out. It missed, but the sound was enough to send the horses into a frenzy. They reared and pulled against their tethers, their powerful movements shaking the very ground. The Sorrow engine's harnesses snapped, and the contraption tilted dangerously to one side. In the chaos, Leopold spotted Clara emerging from the tree line, her figure silhouetted against the snow. She carried a satchel, its contents glinting faintly in the moonlight. Explosives. Clara was no soldier, but her resolve burned brighter than the fear in her eyes. She moved swiftly, placing the charges beneath the Sorrow engine as the soldiers scrambled to regain control of the horses. Leopold barked furiously, drawing attention away from Clara. He darted between the soldiers, nipping at their heels and evading their clumsy attempts to grab him. He was a blur of brown and black, a living distraction. Clara's task was nearly complete when a soldier finally caught sight of her. He raised his weapon, but Leopold launched himself at the man, sinking his teeth into the fabric of his trousers. The shot went wide, and Clara disappeared into the shadows. The explosion that followed was deafening. The Sorrow engine erupted in a plume of fire and smoke, its haunting hum silenced forever. The horses broke free, galloping into the forest, and the soldiers, disoriented and leaderless, began to retreat. Leopold limped back toward the tree line, his body aching but his spirit alight. Clara knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she scooped him up. "You brave, brave boy," she whispered, her tears falling onto his fur. Leopold licked her face weakly, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and relief. For the first time in weeks, the night felt a little less cold. When they returned to the family, Clara recounted the tale, her voice filled with awe. Elise hugged Leopold tightly, her small arms encircling his weary body. In that moment, he felt whole. He was no mere observer, he was a part of something larger, something worth fighting for. The war raged on, but the destruction of the Sorrow engine became a turning point. Whispers of the brave Dachshund spread among the resistance, and Leopold's name became a symbol of quiet courage and unyielding loyalty. He had faced despair and defied it, proving that even the smallest among us could leave an indelible mark on the world. As the seasons turned and the war's fires began to dim, the family's fortunes slowly shifted. The end of the conflict brought a tenuous peace, and though the scars of war remained, life began to take root once more. Clara continued her work with the resistance, transitioning to rebuilding efforts, while Elise's laughter, soft at first, then stronger, began to return to the house. Leopold, now with a noticeable limp, became a living legend among the townsfolk, his tale told and retold in hushed, reverent tones. One spring morning, with the frost finally gone and the sun casting a warm glow over Bone Hill, Leopold found himself lying beneath the old armchair, his favorite hiding spot. The buttery smell of freshly baked bread wafted through the air, and he closed his eyes, content. For all the battles fought, all the pain endured, he had done what he could. He had loved fiercely, stood steadfastly, and reminded a broken world of the power of loyalty and quiet bravery. As the family gathered around the table, their voices mingling in laughter and hope, Leopold drifted into a peaceful sleep. His dreams were filled with memories of Wolfgang and Dietrich, of Maximus and Clara, of Elise and the children beneath the staircase. He had been many things in his life, a soldier, a guardian, a friend. But above all, he had been theirs. And in the end, that was enough.